Imagine this. You've been convicted of a crime and subsequently sentenced to death row. You've sat on death row for years, possibly most of your life. So when or if execution time does come, do you think you should be able to choose your own method of execution? Tonight, we'll be examining that very question based on a case currently on the Supreme Court docket, Nance versus Ward. Let's get into it. All right, so welcome to our very first CaseCold episode. We're so excited to be starting this new series where we'll be examining, court cases, we'll be examining true crime, we'll be examining controversial verdicts and all of that jazz. Just having a good conversation about some of the legal proceedings, some of the criminal things that we seek justice for in our world today. So excited to be back on this new segment, Catelyn.
Pretty excited.
So well, tonight's episode is specifically about a case that is going to be tried before the Supreme Court, Nance versus Ward. So this is on the Supreme Court docket for 2021-2022. So they'll be reviewing this case very shortly. Just before this episode is posted, they would have done the argument for this case already. So that's exciting. So it'll be good to kind of have this discussion before they even make the decision so that we're able to really tease it out and have a good idea about kind of where we sit on it before, obviously, the Supreme Court justices release their decision. But to begin, we wanted to quickly go over what the Supreme Court is, because that's an important institution in the United States, but it's also really important to understand how it works because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we wanted to definitely go and kind of give you guys a good overview. So everybody knows what the Supreme Court is. We know that it is like the biggest court in the land, and that's kind of what we're told in school. How they'll be like, it's like the most powerful court in the nation. And yes, that is true. But I really think that waters it down. You know what I mean? How were you taught that, Catelyn, in school? What the Supreme Court was?
I was just kind of taught that that's the high court, right? If something is going on, that's the court that you take it to, basically. But what I didn't know is that the Supreme Court doesn't handle criminal cases at all. It's
that's
more of
people don't realize is they think it's like your local county court or your state court or whatever. It's not
exactly.
at all. There is no trial. The trial would have been done by the time it gets to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, just some quick facts here. The Supreme Court is the final appellate court of the United States. So when you go and make appeals based on cases, those trial cases, that's the final court you could possibly go to appeal those cases is the Supreme Court, right? So they have the power to overturn decisions made by lower courts, which would be like your Supreme Court of South Carolina or even U.S. Court of Appeals, right? I said South Carolina because that's our home state, but whatever state you live in, that state has its own Supreme Court, and then beyond that you have U.S. Court of Appeals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Supreme Court. So it's the first and final court to make decisions over cases involving public officials, disputes between states, and ambassadors. So they're kind of they're kind of like the court representing the government, as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
So they can bring cases between the government and public officials, like when there's impeachment cases, issues like we've seen with Trump and certain presidents. So they have those cases, but they also dispute cases between states. So if Montana is suing South Carolina for something, that would be Supreme Court's job. Or they can take cases between the citizens and the state and the government, or citizens and states, right? So just for context, that's kind of the cases that they're looking at specifically. And how it works is each year they get so many cases submitted to them from lower courts, right? So, and I read that they get about 7,000 cases a year submitted to them. So that's a good bit they have to wade through, right? Then the current justices basically decide by the rule of four. So 4 people, I guess, as long as there's a majority of, or there's a vote of 4, they will hear the case. It'll move on to different to being argued or not. So once 4 justices like agree on that, they add the case to the docket. Then they hear the case before all 9 justices. And this is what we were talking about earlier. This isn't a trial court. So by hear the case, they're not seeing witnesses, they're not seeing evidence, there's no jury, there's no verdict that they're coming up with. What's really happening is the petitioner, so the person who is bringing up the case to the court or is petitioning whatever the issue with the case is bringing is going to argue his or her or their side of the case to the 9 justices in an attempt to persuade the justices to view the Constitution in a way that would support their cause. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then you have a respondent. So basically the person who is responding or who is essentially like being sued, I guess, that person is also brings up their grievances or like they attempt to persuade the 9 justices to their point of view, to interpret the Constitution via their point of view, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and a big thing we got to remember is it's the justice's job to assess all of these cases by the Constitution of the United States, right? That's their job. The Constitution is sort of their like major framework, their major backbone. So they're checking for the constitutionality basically of all of these cases. Like if the Constitution says we all have the right to bear arms, that's what they're checking certain cases against, right? Mm-hmm. Or if they're holding up to like the 13th, 14th Amendment, they're holding things up to the amendments as well as the actual text of the Constitution, right? Exactly. So yeah, that's why Supreme Court justices are so important, is because they are they're that decision making buffer, I guess, between what is how they rule certain court decisions. And what's important about their ruling specifically is that their ruling set a legal precedent for other cases, right? So like depending on the Nance versus Ward, which is basically a debate over about a death row inmate's request to change an execution method, that's going to set precedent for other death row inmates' ability to choose their execution methods and how they actually go about appealing and challenging the methods of execution set for them, right? So it is important to know what's going on in Supreme Court because I would say more than even other areas of government, they really kind of set a tone for legal proceedings, which can affect if you're ever in any, issue that could affect. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we all know like famous Supreme Court cases like the Dred Scott decision, Brown versus Board of Education, that kind of stuff. Those are all major Supreme Court cases, which then set a historical precedent for other legal issues that might come up in smaller courts,
Exactly.
So, yeah, what do you think about that? I mean, do you want to just like kind of get into Nance versus Ward and kind of the specifics of that case?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So Nance versus Ward is a case about the proper legal procedures for death row inmates challenged to appeal the state's execution method. So like Courtney said, it's basically a death row inmate is trying to appeal to see if he can get a different execution method for his death row sentence, right? So luckily this case was chosen to get to higher court so that the inmate has the option to either to choose and or appeal if that's not the one that he would like, right? So it's basically giving that inmate the option of choosing their execution style, right? However, I do have a question for you, Courtney. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that the inmate should have that option?
Like in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think this is kind of where our debate is going to come in today, because the Supreme Court is looking at what's the proper method for someone to appeal. So they already feel like it's okay for someone to change their execution method. Our question is, what is, like, should someone be allowed to choose in the first place? So we're kind of riffing on what the Supreme Court is doing, just to be clear, so people don't think like the Supreme Court is, what we're saying is exactly what the Supreme Court is saying. But me personally, I almost feel like no. And it's because they already sentenced you to death, right? It's capital punishment.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, if you're gonna die, does it matter? You know what I mean? Maybe that's just me speaking. Just me. I don't know. I sort of feel like maybe I'm apathetic and it's not so much a yes or no. I'm just like, I don't see the necessity.
I think it's more of like I think the reasoning behind it is it's just like people probably want a quick and painless death, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, there's been issues where electrocutions, they've been botched, kind of. Same thing with lethal injection. Some people were not dead, so they had to inject them again, or, you know what I mean? Like electrocute them again. So maybe it's stemming from that, because I think that ethically, the state typically wants to they want to have a level of ethics when it comes to death row for whatever reason. But me personally, I feel like, as a death row inmate, not saying this person's not human, but you also committed a crime, especially if it's a concrete, solid, I committed this murder, right? So, like, I don't really feel bad for you, right? I don't really feel like, what is that option going to provide you? The very people that you hurt by committing said crime that got you on death row, they didn't get the option to choose their execution method and or how they're going to die. You just took that from them, right? So why are you given that right?
I hear that, and I see that side of it. I do. I think for me, I really question the state's ethical responsibility, and I think that's what the Supreme Court would be arguing, is what is our nation's, the government's responsibility to be ethical to this person. You know what I mean? And I think the reason why you have to add ethics in there is because the state is now the murderer. You know what I'm saying? And I think...
I don't look at the state as the murderer. I look at you as the murderer. You committed a crime, and this is the consequence. It's just like a child, right? If you say don't touch the trash can, but it's a natural consequence. If you say, I wouldn't say natural because it didn't just happen, right? But it is a consequence. If you know the consequence and you don't want that consequence to happen, then don't do it. With a child, you say don't touch the trash can, they go touch the trash can. Then you're going to do something to deter them. So maybe like a pop, or like a redirecting them to do something else, or whatever the case may be, so that they then won't do it again, right? But if they go do it again, then whatever happens. If the trash can falls on them, then it's like, that's a natural consequence of you touching the trash can when I told you not to touch the trash can, right?
I hear that, but I'm saying then you get into eye for an eye, which gets very, in my opinion, it gets unethical.
Part of me thinks that if it was an eye for an eye, I doubt people would be willy-nilly just killing people.
I guess.
One thing when you go to prison, you got a place to stay. You're gonna get food. They have to treat you with a certain level of decency in some cases, right? Is it glorified? Is it fancy? Is it someplace that you probably want to stay? No. Is it hard living? I'm sure. But in prison, especially if you're on death row, there's just certain things you don't have to worry about. Compared to like general population.
Well,
you probably have a harder time in general population than you do death row.
They're isolated, so yeah.
Exactly. Besides like the isolation part of it.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's overview facts of the case. Like, like
Okay.
this case specifically. So this case was actually happened in 1993. So this lets you know how long this has been, and it's just getting to the Supreme Court. So a man named Michael Nance robbed a bank. In the process of fleeing, he killed somebody. So we don't know if that was technically considered premeditated murder or not. We don't know. But in 1997, a jury convicted him of murder, and he was sentenced to death. Okay, so he's on death row. So he's been on death row since the late 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Georgia Supreme Court affirmed his death row sentence, and he and rejected a petition for collateral relief for him. He then filed a federal habeas petition. I'll explain a little bit about that later. But and then they denied that petition. So, and then in 2020, he filed another action, basically alleging that lethal injection was unconstitutional, because that was the method they were going to use to execute him. That it was unconstitutional because he had 2 medical issues. So he was appealing because of a medical issue to basically change his execution methods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the district court granted his motion, and the district court dismissed his complaint, saying that it was untimely and that it failed to state a full claim. So the district dismissed him. He appealed it. The U.S. Court of Appeals said that they concluded that the relief he sought, i.e. the changing the method, implied the invalidity of his death sentence. So his death sentence, I guess, implied that he was invalid. And his complaint must be construed as a habeas petition. And because he was already filed an earlier petition, it's properly considered a successive petition. So that's what the Supreme Court is going to be arguing about, is like what method should he have gone through to get his execution changed. But I want to go back and define what habeas petition is. That is, it's a Latin term that basically is, I guess it's the idea behind a federal court's right to determine if a prisoner's detention is valid. So if the way that somebody has been in prison is like fair to them, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they're calling that petition habeas. I know I'm like messing this up. I know I am. I know somebody in law school is going to be like, it's habeas or whatever. I know that. I know I'm not a lawyer. Excuse me. But so basically they use that idea of the court's right to determine if someone is properly imprisoned or not. That's the petition that they name for him to file, right? Because he obviously feels like his imprisonment is, or his execution method is not fitting for his medical condition, right?
Did it say what medical condition? Is he still living?
I think Nance? I'm not sure if the person's still living. I mean, he's been on death row for some years, so I'm sure he's an older person for sure.
Mm-hmm. But did they say what his medical condition was?
They don't say. They just say he had a medical condition, and it's making me think, if he has some concern about it, that maybe it like lethal injection would like cause him pain as he was dying. I don't know. So maybe that's why he wanted it altered instead of just doing lethal injection, which has become the most modern standard for execution. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically this. So the habeas is basically to test the legality of somebody's imprisonment. Like, is it legal to imprison someone in this way? And that gets into, to me, the ethics of it. Basically, what they're saying with this writ of habeas, or that idea of habeas, is the state being ethical in their imprisonment of a person? Is this legal to do? Is it, well, I guess legal and ethical are 2 different things, but is it legal and therefore hopefully ethical to imprison someone this way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? I think that idea is really interesting. I had to look up what it meant, but obviously they're using it in connection with this case. So there's some sort of, they see this as ingrained in there. You know what I mean? But what do you think about it?
I don't know. It's because I'm always like, for me, it always comes back to like ethics, right? And it's like, is that, there's I guess like ethics and morals, right? But I like, me personally, I am more of a especially when it comes to like death row cases. I just feel like I feel like you shouldn't have that option to.
Like, you feel like by the time they get there, they are like revoked all rights, basically.
Yeah, I feel like, when you become a prisoner, you're a prisoner to the state, right? So it's, that's that one, you get to make that one choice, but everything else you don't. You lose the right to make choices when you go to prison.
I think that's the thing, though, is like, then you can get into the state doing some pretty heinous things if you don't check them. Like, then they can
I
really
agree,
be
but like,
torturing people.
don't sign up to go to prison and don't do things that make you go to prison. You know what I mean?
I think I agree. First line of defense is don't be a criminal. Don't do don't do crimes, right? That would land you in prison. That's first line of defense. But I think if that, for the people who are going to commit crimes or people who inadvertently commit crimes, you can't. I think you have to have an ethical code, a legal code that requires that you treat prisoners a certain way. Like, and that's what I think is the crux of this case. It's about how do we, somebody who's the most disenfranchised member of society, somebody who is on death row, we have claimed we want this person to die. That's as disenfranchised as you can get. We still have we have a responsibility to treat this person ethically in this situation. That's what I think. For ourselves, just for our own governmental integrity.
But then, don't get me wrong, murder is murder, right? The state is essentially committing murder, right? So then you're no better than the criminal.
That's why I'm saying that's what I've been saying.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't pick and choose when to be ethical.
What?
That's my point. You can't pick and choose when to be ethical. Like, okay, let's be honest here. The entire prison system in America is not ethical, right?
I agree with that.
So that's the one thing you want to choose to be ethical on?
I think
they're already gonna die. Like, I'm confused.
I agree, but I think that regardless, if you're gonna have a prison system, which the U.S. is probably not gonna get rid of its prison system anytime soon, the least I feel like you can do or should do is keep a level of ethics about it. I'm not saying I even feel like the whole thing is ethical. I'm not saying I feel like prison is ethical as an institution. But I think if you're going to, because who is the threat then? The state or the individual at that point?
Both. They both committed a murder.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's important that if you're going to have something like a death row in place, if you're going to have execution methods in place, you have to have some check of ethics on the government's part at the very least. You can't control what an individual does, but you can control to the best of your ability what the state does.
Yeah, I guess. So, okay, so that brings me to the question. Do you think the inmate should choose, or do you think there maybe should be like a trial to see what's like best fitting?
You know what? A trial could be good. I think that could be good. Like a trial for what you think their execution method should be.
Yeah, to see what the method should be. Yeah. And so then it's not up to the prisoner who committed a crime and took, someone else's life at their own hands, right? So I feel like that could be like a fair compromise.
Yeah, I think that, like if a jury of peers decided, I guess. Although, juries, you can get into what's the ethics of a jury too. But I do think that seems off rip more fair to me because it's not a judge specifically saying it and it's not a individual deciding. It's the peers. But I could see peers being just as cruel, just as whatever as the state. And I actually almost feel like the state might have more checks than the individual would. Like, you know what I mean? Than like a jury of individuals.
I'll even admit for myself, if I know someone, I'm in a courtroom and I have to decide that for someone and I know they committed murder, and it was like ridiculous, you know what I mean? Like, it was just senseless, which that's most murderers, let's be honest. But it was just like for the victim, it was extremely tragic. You know what I mean? I'm not
Yeah.
going to have any type of ethics for you. I'm not going to have any type of sympathy for you. You deserve what's coming to you. So, me, if it was me, I would probably pick the worst. I don't know if I could ethically choose which execution style without involving like emotions, right?
Yeah.
Which, when it comes to ethics, it's kind of like taking that part of it out. You can't take it
Yeah.
personal. You
Well,
can't.
yeah. Well, see, I think ethics is different than compassion.
But
I
no,
think,
it totally is. But ethics is more just like by the book, right?
yeah,
Um,
it's like a moral code, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
It's like
beyond like
what's
morals, because
fair.
morals can be personal to you. Ethics is just like it is what it is. This is what we're gonna go by.
Or yeah, what's like
It's kind of
fair
like the
for
law, right? The
everyone.
law is the law. That's it. You can challenge
But
it, but good
I
luck.
but I think this brings up an interesting question. Is legal the same as ethical? I don't think so. I don't think so
No,
at all, actually. Because
at all.
legal is a code written into law that can be made up. You can make totally
Oh yeah,
unethical laws that like really aren't about fairness, aren't about showing some level of compassion for someone, even if they've done wrong. You know, laws are just a legal code by which we live our lives, and you know that are punishable or that set standards basically for what counts as a crime, what counts as punishment, what counts as
hmm
offenses, right?
yeah. But I
That's
feel like you could say the same for ethics, though.
how so. Go ahead, explain.
I think you could say the same for ethics because ethics is based out of, like, you could say, for example, law, right?
Yeah,
This is what you should do. This is the right thing to do. But you are deeming that as an individual the right thing to do. That may not be the right thing to do for me.
that's true. And that's what makes it difficult is because our ethical system and our moral system is so conflated with what we consider the law.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you said, something might be legal and ethical, or it could be ethical and not legal.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, so that's where the conundrum comes in, is because it's like you want to set a legal code that's based on an ethical code, but there is no consensus on what ethics looks like.
For one, yeah. And for two, all of these things are made by man, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
um is very flawed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's also very much so based out of the individual's morals, values, their experiences. This all comes from a place within them. So it's really individualized, made into an overall law for everybody.
Exactly. And that's how you get into issues with like laws being skewed towards one race or another, is like
Exactly.
when
Which is
one
not
group,
ethical.
yeah, when one group sets the ethical standard, yes, it
Mm-hmm.
might be standard for you, but is that the ethical standard for that is creating fairness for everybody,
Exactly.
equitability for everybody?
Yeah.
And that's how you get into actually some of the death row statistics that we know about now, um, which is basically that death row prisoners. This is interesting to me because I always thought it was skewed black white, but
Mm-hmm.
apparently 42% of death row is white, and then black is 41%.
Hmm.
So I mean they're
Interesting.
neck and neck, but like I don't know why I thought it was more.
Yeah, me too.
But I guess the biggest issue or the biggest like gap we see is the data on people who are executed for interracial murders. So a black defendant versus a white victim versus a white defendant versus a black victim. So there's like many more. When there's a black defendant and then a white victim, you're like much more likely to go to jail, 4 times more likely to be convicted of killing a white person than a white person of killing a black person. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's a clear inequality there.
And I feel like
Um,
that's always been like true about the criminal justice system, right? They
mhm.
it's a disproportion, um, is it disproportion? Is that how you say it? Yes.
Yeah.
Between the population of African Americans to white. But I feel like that might be just in general, just because they were incarcerating people, just because they were African American, essentially, you know? It wasn't
Yeah.
because they actually did a crime. It was just like, we got to get a body so that we can say someone did this and pin it on somebody. So they were
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
more likely to get an African American in cases like that. But I do think like nowadays it's harder to do that with all of the evidence and stuff that you have to have now. On top of
Exactly.
the means of even getting the evidence. So like all of the testing and stuff like that to prove concretely you did said crime, right? It's not just probable cause. You got to have some concrete facts, you know, a murder
Exactly.
weapon, a guilty a guilty plea, or you know what I mean? Like there's so much more to it now.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I find this interesting. I didn't know this stat. Executions by region. In the South, there's like 1,256 executions versus the Midwest 196, and then the West 87, and then Northeast 4, and then Texas has 573 on its own.
Wow.
But like, yeah, so Texas has like half the executions of the entire South. But the South has so many more executions by region. So I guess they sentence people to death row more, and then they execute.
Well, I know some states, I think I read it was 20 something states have abolished it. So that may be why, you know.
That's
I
probably
know if you so Virginia became the 23rd state and the first in the South to abolish the death penalty. But I don't know if that applies to like prior sentences, like say you were sentenced before that that law took
I feel like it
place.
wouldn't it? No.
I would think so, but I mean, if it doesn't, then that person may still be on death row. But you know, also too, it depends on the state that you're tried in too.
Yeah.
So,
you know, I just find it interesting. Like the Bible Belt also has the like highest like murder rates and like crime rates, and like all these like issues. You know, I just find it interesting. Like, and you know, people know we're from the Deep South. We're from South Carolina. Okay, so Deep South, but it's just when I read these stats on like how the how not specifically South Carolina, but how the South really like the behavior of the people. It's just interesting to me because I'm like, if we're gonna have a church on every corner, why we also turn out murderers? You know what I mean?
I think that also is why. You know what I mean? Like in the South, everything's just like, oh, say hi, be nice, be the good old boy kind of state.
It's like repressed.
That's what we
Everybody's
say.
like repressed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And everybody, quote unquote, appears nice, even if they have ill intent here.
Yeah.
And so
it's easy to cover up with the Bible. It's easier to cover up with that.
Yeah. Those are some of the worst people that I've ever met are at the church. So
the worst, the craziest people I ever met go to church. I'm telling you. Mm-hmm. Hands down. Yeah.
For sure.
But also some of the nicest people. So I can't, I'm not going to say it's like all, but some of the people that I know who have either mental health disorders or have, issues that really, they have a hard time interacting with people, they're like devout. And I think that should
those
not
are the ones you got to worry about, in my personal opinion.
I agree.
Devout, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, like, those are the people that are willing to look past, like, for example, crimes. Like, because, well, you've been saved. But so you let out the criminal because they've been saved for them to be a repeat offender,
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, once you show me who you are, I won't believe it.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I think that the South has such a repressed culture. There is about performing to being a good person, performing being a nice person, performing being blah, 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 but repressing every other kind of emotion or every other kind of lifestyle. And so, but I feel like a lot of people are like, they can't really handle that repression. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's like, don't be gay. Don't wear interesting clothes. Don't do anything but work at, be a construction worker. Don't be anything but be a nurse or a teacher. Like, it's this like formulaic lifestyle of like only be this that I think makes people who are deviant, which most people deviate from the standard on some level. Anybody who's deviant, they like repress. And then like where does that go? You know what I mean?
I also think like historically too, the South, if you look at the past of the South, they've been very like we'll just say like politically, it's like right or left wing, right?
Yeah.
And so you like, for example, your conservatives, you have the extremes of that, and you have a lot of extremes that play nice in the South as well. I would say majority of the population is probably more of that conservative extreme, most likely, who can do no wrong, white is right type of people. So you also have that also playing, like, I can't do any wrong. Imagine telling yourself that, oh, well, white is right. Everything I do is okay. Da, 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 da. But, well, if you commit a murder, you're going to think, oh, well, I can get away with this, most likely.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. I think the ethical standard, like we were saying, in the South is warped, and it's really tied to like religion. They try to set like religion as the ethical standard, but I don't think religion is the same as ethics, actually.
At all.
I think religion at one point it's intended to be an ethical standard and intended to be a way we treat people, how we behave in society. But I think the way religion works now is so like warped by human interest that is no longer an ethical standard.
Agree. And I think also too that, like, let's be honest here, the Bible, right, was written, let's just say, by man, right, in quotations here, which is flawed in itself.
Exactly.
If that's the case, so you're holding yourself to this moral standard of quote unquote, because we are using a human for example here, that's written by a human who hasn't even really figured out life either. So you're holding yourself to this moral code that isn't even a moral code or is not ethical, right? So you're essentially living a lie.
Yeah, it's definitely a conundrum. That's all I'm saying. It's
very complicated.
Very complicated. I mean, these are big, like, philosophical questions that, like, people have been trying to answer for decades, for millennium. At this point, like, people have, this is not a new conversation. We wanted to really put it in context with something tangible now that is going to be discussed among, our government at the highest court, because, like we were saying, this sets a precedent for people moving forward, like death row inmates moving forward. If there continues to be a death row, you know what I mean? Because it's something we could also. I just thought about it now. We always talk about like the Spanish Inquisition historically. You know what the Spanish Inquisition is, or like the Salem witch trials, or like the Revolutionary War, not Revolutionary War, but the French Revolution, where they're guillotining people, right? Really, you could put death row in the same conversation with those institutions. So when we look back, we think, oh, those institutions were so warped. They were just witch hunting people. They were just, it was just like blood and murder, and they didn't care. As long if you didn't agree with them, then you cut their head off, right? And we look at those institutions as like vile and non-civilized now, right? But when we really consider what death row is and how it functions, we have to put ourselves in a conversation with, is this civilized?
Yeah. No, I mean, even outside of death row, the prison system as a whole, right? If you do something or like, you say something that you're not supposed to say, or you do something that you're not supposed to do, it's the same thing as the witch trials.
Exactly. That's why I think we point to those historical events, because we're like, oh, nah. I mean, that was wrong. Like, that was obviously horribly wrong, right? Or we see the flaw in that clearly. But I guess because we sit in death row now, and that's our main means of, that's our highest form of punishment is death, right? We don't, a lot of times I think the average person doesn't critically sit and think about, like, that is the same behavior. It's an eye for an eye, right?
Yeah, they say
Like,
history repeats itself, though. So are
exactly.
we
It shows up in
surprised?
different ways, but it's like, you hate to say it, but like Caitlin was bringing up today, and I thought it was weird that like South Carolina is bringing back the firing squad. So if you don't know what a firing squad is, that is an execution method by which they basically line up executioners who have a gun and they shoot. They just open fire on the individual who's being executed, right? So that's a very old, archaic method of executing someone, and I think that's why it had been gone for so long. It's because it was probably at one point considered like unethical, right? But they brought it back.
But I will say this: in order to have the firing squad as your as an execution method, the inmate has to choose this. The preferred method in South Carolina is lethal injection.
Mm-hmm.
But if lethal injection is not available, then you get to choose which one you want to do. And firing squad is now an option.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thanks for clarifying. But I think that, I think you have to put this in conversation with historical methods of executing someone. Like that's what they did. That's what Hitler did to the Jews, right? And Auschwitz, or any of the Holocaust ghettos that they would, no, concentration camps, not ghettos, but concentration camps that they would put Jewish people in, or any outcast member of, German society. They lined them up and shot these people. That it wasn't right then. I don't think it's right now, but like you have to start asking yourself what does it, like, this is part of a bigger conversation. It's not just because it's legal here that it's not, that it's somehow ethical. Legality does not equal ethical. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm like. If you have the option to choose and that's what you choose, then who am I to tell you that that's not an option for you?
I don't think. Well, yes, if you choose it, then you choose it. No one's going to tell anybody how they want to die.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, I think on this part of the state, it's offering that up in the first place, or even allowing that to be an option. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, in the United States, there's only been 3 people that have been executed by firing squad. So, clearly it's not a preferred way of dying.
Yeah.
But
it's like sort of inhumane. I think it's inhumane.
I don't know, but and don't be wrong. I don't think I can see where you're going with this inhumane, but I do think if you choose that method, then you know what you're signing for. You're signing up for, right? You choose your execution method way before you even get to your execution. And most of the time you're doing some years because you go through like appeals and you go through all these other things through the legal system before you even get to your death, right? So you had the option to choose. And now you will have the option to appeal said options as well, right? So if that's your final decision, so be it, in my personal opinion. I also think too, if you're out here, if you're on death row, you probably did something that was it was pretty
capital crime.
Yeah, it was a big deal, right? And it was likely very tragic for the victims and or victim. Because only certain things can get a death penalty, right? So in my eyes, I'm just like, karma. What goes around comes around. That person did not get to choose their execution date at all. They didn't get to choose how they died. So you at least get that option. You at least get the option to live for 20 years in a prison, even though I'm sure that's not where you want to be. But you also made that choice as well.
Well, that brings up an interesting concept, because they're assuming that life in prison is somehow better than death. Like the worst thing that can happen to you is death. Right? That's what they're assuming. By saying, well...
I wouldn't say that.
Well,
I would say that death is more of the easy way out, so they make you sit there and suffer.
But that's not what the state is assuming, though. Because if the worst thing they could do to you was kill you, right? That's why you're waiting there for that long.
Well, no, you're not waiting there for that long, because you can get a death. If you don't appeal anything, your death sentence is like usually not that long. It's It's only when you start appealing and stuff like that.
Okay, yes. And that's that adds to my point. It's still, they think that the worst thing that can happen to you is that you die. You get taken off of Earth. Because otherwise, they just put you in prison, right? There are people who are in prison for murder right now, not on death row.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But they say, okay, the highest crime we can possibly give you is this sentencing to death. So they're assuming that life in prison is somehow ideal in comparison. That's what our system assumes. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Because what life are you living in prison?
So you think basically prison itself is a death sentence?
Heck yes.
Okay.
It is a death sentence. If you're there the rest of your life, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're not living.
Do you think life in prison is worse of a sentence than the death penalty?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm living, when I'm dead, I'm free of everything.
Yeah, that's true. To me, I think death is the easy way out. For sure.
Yeah. And that's why I think our legal system gets it really wrong, is the idea that I think, and that's what makes me think that it's not about the prisoner. Mm-hmm. It's about justice for the optics for the people, or for
and I think also money
feels wrong, is because on the outside, when we're living, we think death is the worst thing that could absolutely happen to a person, is dying. But for the prisoner who's already committed a crime, who's already been convicted, who's already lived through prison,
that's the easy.
That seems ideal. The death sentence is for our gratification. And that, to me, is where the ethics comes in. It's like, why did people go and watch people's heads get sliced off in the guillotine? Was it about the person getting killed, or was it about the audience? It's about the audience.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, it's like, the person getting killed, they are essentially performing for the people. And it's like, you have to question the ethicalness of watching someone die. Like, I guess that gives them the completion of it, but I think you got to question the ethics of it. It's like that movie, you've seen Green Mile, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know how they have the audience come in and watch the prisoners get killed?
Executed, yeah.
It's like that. It's like, you have to question why that audience wants to sit there and watch a man burn.
Yeah, and I think it's, gratification from, their loss, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, if I suffer, you suffer, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And while I think that's, problematic in certain ways, I understand that. I understand that feeling, you know what I mean? I really, I really empathize, because I've never experienced anything like that, but I really empathize for those people. I'm really into true crime and stuff like that. And the reason why I'm really into it is because I really like to know what got the killer to that point. So what events have happened in their life to get them to the point where they're like, you know what, I'm going to kill, right? Mm-hmm. Or events leading up to the death that was something that wasn't premeditated. And a lot of it stemmed from trauma, right?
Yeah.
In their early lives, and so that's how they got there, or a lack of seeing other options. But at the same time, that doesn't. I still feel so much empathy for the families and the victims in that, because a lot of it is senseless. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of it is, you're just taking a life because you feel so entitled to take someone's life. So why should I spare yours? For the life of me, I can't understand. It's hard for me to wrap my head around. I don't care what you've gone through in your life, because I feel like everybody has gone through something that is traumatic in their life at some point, right? But that doesn't make everybody a killer. You know what I mean? People have, in my personal opinion, there's always someone worse off than you.
Yeah.
And they're not killers. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I really wholeheartedly get you too. Is why should you live? Why should somebody live on when they've taken a life? I get that. I really honestly get that. And that's what makes it such a conundrum, is because, yes, should they live because they took a life? But should they also die for our gratification? Because don't we also become part of the problem? It's that conundrum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily be gratified by seeing someone die or like getting the death penalty for someone. But what I
Mm-hmm.
would know is that would provide me a peace of mind for the fact that I know you cannot do this again. If you get
Yes.
a death sentence,
Yeah.
like if you don't get a death sentence, say you get you commit a murder, you get 20 years. You are then out in 20 years and you could reoffend. Did you really learn anything in prison? And let's be honest, the way our prison system is set up, in most cases, there's not much learning. You go in one way, you come out much worse.
Yeah. And I
So,
think that's true too. And another topic of conversation is prison reform. Prison, you know what I mean? Like, and that really is its own conversation because you could really get into that. But yeah, I agree. I think that it's tough to know, and maybe that's why we just still have the death penalty. We still have that method of punishment. It's because on one level, it is about you took someone's life and this is what you deserved as a result of that. You know, and the other level is okay. At what point do we, the state, or the non-criminals, become the murderers? Because technically, I bet you for every murderer who's been in prison, the state has killed somebody else. The U.S. government has slain someone else on some level, either in a war, either neglect of its own citizens, either in prison, somebody dying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so who? I guess the bigger question for this episode is, who is the murderer?
Yeah. Because like if you're gonna keep it at ethics, right? Murder is murder, whether you're government, whether you're a citizen committing a murder or a crime. Murder is murder. It's the act of taking someone's life, however, whatever means that person took. So, while we're talking about ethics, right? And how they need to uphold a certain level of ethics. Well, you've already taken ethics out if you're killing somebody, period.
Exactly. And that's a good point, that ethics is almost removed when you're executing someone. You know, it's removed for the individual, but it's removed for the state as well, because we're both murderers now.
But I think that's why they consider it like an execution. You know what I mean? It's not murder. It's an execution because this person did a crime,
terms,
right?
but a life is taken for a life.
Oh yeah. But part of me also think that's fair. If you're going to take someone's life senselessly, then I don't think, because I mean, let's be honest. Are you going to return that person back to society?
No.
Okay, what are you going to do? Just let them sit in prison?
That's what I think life imprisonment is worse.
I mean, I don't think it's any better. I think they're both two evils. But I mean, at the same time, also, when you're sitting in prison, that's tax money. You pay for that.
I agree, that's tax money too. But I think I'm not even totally opposed. I really actually, despite my arguments here, I don't actually have an answer for this because I really do see both sides of it. This is one issue I do actually genuinely see both sides on, and I'm normally not like that. But I think that what makes prison life hell is when you endure something that is an institution which is meant to break you down. That is a kind of hell.
Oh, no, I definitely think prison is not the place you want to be at all. Prison is not the place where it's promoting growth and changing in life. It's definitely an institution where they keep you. Let's be honest, an institution is essentially slavery. That's essentially what it is. You're enslaving the mind to keep them where you need to keep them, period.
Yeah.
However, that is at the expense of you committing a crime. So, that you can also bring that into ethics. Is that fair? But, I mean, my empathy goes more to the victim's family before the inmate.
I hear that, and I think that's true because like whoever was killed was presumably killed innocently out of no fault of their own, right? Right.
And typically, that's typically how it is. I'm not saying that I don't think anyone deserves to be killed. So I could say 100%, even if you're having a disagreement or argument, whatever the case is. So
I think you hit on something that I kind of lost my thought now, but you hit on something I thought was really interesting about what you were just saying about the state kind of, or like the victim, I think though that even as a victim, you have to say, okay, the punishment that I want to see this person go through, I have to assess where my own ethical outlook is, my own moral, I guess, outlook is. Because again, like I was saying, like, what was the difference between the people sitting there lapping up the blood from the guillotine and then the people in the Green Mile watching this person get electrocuted? Like, it's the same, like, the only word I can think is gratification, like gratification in the sense like this person who killed is now killed. But you got to think,
at what point
like the same way they want murder is the same way I now want murder. You see what I'm saying?
At what point do you keep putting in resources to someone that's going to die there anyway?
And I agree with that too. But the thing is, they keep putting in resources for the vast majority who do not end up dying, who are not.
Yeah, but okay, those people, I suppose the hope is to, get them to be productive citizens when they come out. But if you're on death row, right, or you have life in prison, you're not getting out.
Yeah.
So at what point do you stop pouring in resources? Because that costs money. And I wish I had a statistic on how much it costs to keep an inmate in prison per year.
That's like a good bit of money. Oh,
right. I think it is.
I remember what I was going to say now is the other part of when we remove ethics for at least the state is we already know the state is skewed to privilege a certain kind of person. It's skewed to privilege white people. It's skewed to privilege men. It's skewed to privilege people of wealthy people. Mm-hmm. So when we combine all those and we get death row, especially when we start becoming unethical on death row, you end up waging war on the poor people or the black people or the disenfranchised people or the mentally handicapped people. We end up waging an unethical war on people who are already disenfranchised to a certain degree, right? Because if that's where, assuming now, and we've seen case after case where there's people who have done heinous, horrible crimes. They had the money, they were white, they got out. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, that makes me think of like the case of Anthony, for example.
Yeah.
We all know she did it.
Yeah.
We all know she did it.
Stuff like that. But
she should have been a death rower, for sure.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, we've seen, and then you can even take it somewhere like with, I know it's controversial, but like the O.J. Simpson thing, who got off too. Like the idea of, he was a black man, but he had money. You know what I mean? So then you end up skewing ethics, quote, then you lose ethics again because you're privileging certain people because of the resources that they have. It's like this isn't a death row case, and it wasn't as serious as a death row case, but we all know the Lori Loughlin and the college scam, right? That where they basically got a slap on the wrist, and I think they did like a month community service or a month in like prison or something, right? But these people had money, and everyone was sort of outraged because they're like, okay, so the ethical standard for them has shifted because they've committed, really stole somebody's spot, totally impersonated, totally lied, totally just didn't, follow any kind of ethical standard, but then the government then in turn privileges them by not making her go. They don't go to prison. They don't go to or did she go to prison? She go to
I
prison
think
or
she
jail?
served a little bit of time, but it was
She served
not.
a little bit. Well, she didn't go for a long time. I think it was like a month.
Yeah, it was like a month.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like very small,
Yeah.
summer camp is basically what she went to,
And I think her husband, like, he did the majority of the sentence or something.
yeah, and they had to
Like
pay a
one person
fine or
didn't.
something, which
Yeah, it
they
was like
have
a
the
hefty
money to
fine.
do. Yeah, which they have the money to pay. So like they're privileging people who have the resources to skirt around ethics in the first place, right? So then the
But that's what I'm
government
saying.
becomes a part of the
The ethics
problem.
is the problem. You have the sense of ethics to what? It's an individualized concept here. It's not for the greater good.
Yeah.
It's what is personal to me and what is going to work for me. Period. Same thing with morals and values. Same thing with laws. So should ethics even be a thing?
Well, I think if you totally remove ethics, then you have nothing.
Yeah, but you with ethics you have nothing because it's based off the person who can benefit out of it.
That's true. Maybe
So
it's
who's
just
really benefiting here? The only way you're benefiting is if you have money and you're most likely white.
exactly. That's why I think it's just maybe it's just bound to be this way. You hate to say it, but maybe it is. Because it's like
part of me also thinks that this is the way that I feel like they want to construct America so that they can just do whatever. With chaos, it keeps you chaotic so that they can do their underlying mission, right?
yeah.
So that may be the bigger picture here.
I don't know. I mean, these are things that are really important to consider, though. I think, especially when we're talking about Supreme Court cases, and in this case, the case of Michael Nance, in his death row sentence, his appeal to have his execution method changed, right? Because you really get into, well, is it ethical to even execute somebody? Is it ethical for them for certain methods to be used if they are going to be used? Like you really get into these sort of bigger questions than just what's the proper way for him to go about it,
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think there is no like right answer, right? Like Courtney said earlier, I agree with her and her saying that I'm not one way or the other. It's really like a complex situation that involves multiple factors, right? And also too, when you're talking about like ethics and stuff like that, it also depends on the individual person, the individual case, what happened to the victim, what did not happen to the victim, were they actually sentenced to a death penalty, were they not sentenced to a death penalty, the stuff that was presented in the trial, what wasn't presented in the trial. So there's so many other factors that you have to keep into mind when you're making a decision or whether or not they should have the option to be executed or choose their execution method, or should they be executed? Should they only get a life sentence, or should death row even be a thing? So
yeah, I think I mean you can get into some really heavy topics, and like we honestly could talk about this like all day. You know what I mean?
Seriously.
Like you really could, because it's not something that you just kind of. It's nothing to play with, because somebody's life is like really at stake here. Like multiple people's lives are at stake here.
Mm-hmm.
So before we close out this episode, you want to give a final. What would be your verdict on this case? Like, what would you, if you had, you were sitting in one of those 9 robes, what would your ruling be on this case specifically? Or like, just kind of that question that we're asking.
Yes.
Should someone be allowed to choose their execution method?
Me personally, I would have to choose no. I don't think an inmate should have the option to choose an execution method, just because I really, like I said earlier, I sympathize and not sympathize. I empathize more with the life that was lost, typically senselessly. And so not to provide gratification, but more of from a standpoint of this is taking resources also from me who took someone of one of my loved ones, for example, as well as how long do you keep this person, like how much grace and kindness should you put towards that other person when that same thing was not given to, that back to the victim or the victim's family and stuff like that. So me personally, I would have to say no. I really think that, you also have the conscious decision to choose to act in certain ways as a citizen. Um, and a lot of murders are planned and or not planned, but um, you're there with the right stuff to carry out said things, right? So you have that option to make a wiser decision. You have that option to not go to prison. But if you make that decision, then those are your consequences. It's not like we're not aware of these consequences. Everybody knows the consequences of committing a murder.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
Everybody knows that's an option. Death penalty is always on the table.
Yep. That's true.
So, yeah, I would have to say no.
Yeah, I hear that. And I see that. I see that totally, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
what do you think?
My verdict for this case specifically, I have to agree with I think you can tell I'm conflicted. Right? I think that he should. I'm not sure he should be able to choose his method. Like, I do feel like maybe if we're going to sentence him to death, then he should make then the decision should be made for him. Mm-hmm. Which I believe that's how they do it, right? I don't know, but
I think it depends on the state as of right now. Usually the state has a preferred method, and that's what they go with as long as that's available. So you don't really get to choose unless the option is not available.
Gotcha. Yeah. In this case, he's petitioning to basically change his method and have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think in this case, I would probably say I would grant but pending the medical condition, and if it was proven that his medical condition could like cause him pain or something during the execution, then yeah, I would allow it to change. But I think I would have what we talked about earlier. I'm kind of compromising here, but I would have like a jury of peers decide what his execution method would be, not just a judge. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Coming up with the sentencing, or I guess following sentencing guidelines, I would give the jury of his peers. For some reason, that feels more egalitarian to me. I don't know why. Maybe that's just skewed, but I could see a jury of peers, especially a diverse group, really having a serious conversation about how this person should be executed, and if it's ethical, if the state's methods are ethical.
I do. I can see that. I do think a jury provides more of a moral compass because you're getting different people's opinions, outlooks, and stuff like that, right? Yeah. But I also think too that murder is murder, right? So yeah, whether you're your jury or your individual person making that decision, it is the same thing, right? Maybe you, as a person on a jury, you feel less guilt making that choice because it wasn't just your decision. But I mean, essentially, it is the same thing. It's just the glorified and the legal way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a complex question. I mean, I guess that's why it's at the Supreme Court. That's probably why they took it, because it's like there's a lot to consider there, especially with that writ of habeas. What's the federal court's right to determine if a prisoner is sentence valid, if their sentence is valid. Yeah. So that's probably why they took it, because it is complex. But I think the jury of the peers would be the way I could see it. I could kind of wrap my head around it. But again, I want to make sure that the state is being held ethically or responsible for their execution, because I feel like it's a very slippery slope before the state is just torturing and killing individuals as they please. And then you get into something like a Putin or a Hitler, where it was just whatever we say goes. And I think when there's no checks on the government, that's when it becomes, or there's no checks on the states or the executioner, that's when you can get into some pretty gruesome, tormenting type stuff. Because, again, if the state's going to be a murderer, if the individual's going to be a murderer and the state's going to be a murderer, what makes the state different? And they're, different, or being held responsibly. Is their responsibility different to the victim?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Is the death sentence, when you get sentenced to that, is that handed down by just a judge, or is that handed down by a jury too?
I mean, I think the trial.
I know you go to. Yeah.
I know the trial verdict is handed down by a jury. I'm not sure if the sentencing is handed down by a jury.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That
makes a difference to me.
For sure.
It's small, but it makes a difference in who's like handing out that punishment, because that's a big punishment.
Yeah.
That's a punishment you don't come back from. So,
one question I have about like Nance, so the individual case, is he was, saying that he needs to choose his execution method because of his medical condition, and I think it was initially lethal injection. Was it right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what? And he was basically posing a question of that with his medical condition, lethal injection would be painful. But what I don't understand is, for who would it not be painful for?
Well, I
lethal
think
injection is not like they literally inject you with a substance to shut down your organs.
But I don't know if it's supposed to be painful.
It is. It's literally shutting down your organs.
So that's painful. I guess that's painful.
Yeah, like, okay, imagine like you know.
I thought they did something that really just like you ease on out, like.
I don't think it's an ease on out. They literally like inject you with it full load, and I want to say it's like I want to say it's like some type of vitamin, I want to say, or something. Or it's like several different injections actually, but there's like certain things that like stop your heart, that stop your your liver, stop your. That's going to be painful.
I guess. That was my question too. Is like, okay, so you're gonna die. Does it matter if it's painful or not?
I mean,
either way,
like firing. So to me, honestly, like a firing squad might be quicker, than sitting on a table for 30 minutes and letting your organs individually shut down.
I agree, but yes, and that's true. But that's in the individual's perspective. What does the state look like doing this? Because there's two experiences here. There's the individual being killed. Then there's the 4 or 5 men who have been told by their boss they need to go shoot someone.
Mm-hmm.
It's two different. It's two different. It's like why we get mad at the police when they go kill an unarmed black man, right? It's like, okay, maybe the man is loitering and technically that's illegal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe this person's whatever. So technically, yes, there's a crime committed. But does it make it right for the guy to put his foot on his neck for 9 minutes? See what I'm saying? It's like, yes, maybe he got the call to go get a man who was either drunk. And I shouldn't be making parallels between the George Floyd case and then just a random person I'm coming up with. But when the police officer gets that call, they're going in and performing a duty. They're doing a job that they were told to do, right? Mm-hmm. And if this person is clearly in the wrong in that moment, yes, they're clearly in the wrong, and the officer has the right and the responsibility to go and either arrest this person or reprimand this person, however that looks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, at what point does it become the state who sent him out to do this, when the officer takes it too far and kills someone, as often happens with our black men, right? When the officer takes it too far, is it also the state's responsibility for sending him out to do this in the first place if there was no solid evidence?
I think so, because he's acting as the state in that role, right?
And that's what I'm saying. Police officers and those executioners are agents of the state in that moment. They're not individuals making a decision. It's agents of the state. So you have to start questioning, and that's why these trials, I think, are so controversial. Things like the George Floyd trial, and they backtrack and trace everything, is because was it just about that officer, or was it about the fact that the officer got the call from his sheriff or whoever, his superior in the first place? Was it about the individual who might have been in the wrong, who might have had a warrant, or what? Because somebody ended up dead. You know, I think these are deep ethical questions that I don't think we address enough, because we just want to say, like, eye for an eye really quickly. And it's like, okay, if I take your eye, you hit me, I hit you, who's right?
No one. But that's what I'm saying. That is my point exactly. That no one is right. So everyone's bringing up this, you know, is that ethical? Is that ethical? Is that ethical when it comes to the incarceration system as a whole, let alone the death penalty? Nothing about the death penalty is ethical. Nothing about the prison system is ethical. So why do you keep trying to uphold ethics to certain things when the whole system is unethical? That one thing's not going to make the system ethical.
I agree with that. I agree with you. I think that's the crux of both of our debates, is you're trying to, like, it's like trying to perfume crap, basically. Yeah. It's like, it's already crap.
You're still going to smell trash.
Yeah. It's like, you know, like people say, what is that? There's some saying, people like, you can't, it's some saying, but like no, or trying to act like your ish doesn't stink, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. And it's just, is the system as a whole is not necessarily ethical, but neither was the individual ethical. So it makes it like, I guess my argument is, if it's not going to be ethical, do your best in your unethicalness to have some sort of standard. I guess that's my argument. Have some sort of standard. If you're going to, like, do this unethical act, have some standard.
Yeah. Well, I did read up on lethal injection. So according to this website I read, they basically inject you with potassium chloride, which it basically slows down, it interrupts the electrical impulses throughout your body. So that's how it shuts down your organs, right? But it causes severe pain at the site of the IV line, and as well as, like, as it's going through your body, basically shutting off everything. So it's interrupting, like, that communication from your brain to your organs. So imagine that, like, something's inside of you and it's at a high concentration to make it quick, right? Even in that 2 minutes, it's severely painful. So with your medical condition, it's not going to be any different.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I guess hopefully the Supreme Court considers that as well. Like, what's really happening during lethal injection, you know? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is a tough question. I mean, I guess they're going to refer to the Constitution for these answers, but
I don't feel like the Constitution has, like, any clarity on that.
I'm not sure if it does either, but I'm saying, like, they do. The Constitution is supposed to set the standard for kind of the backbone of, like, ironically enough, the backbone of how we ethically proceed in this nation, right? So I think they'll probably use that. And, like, I would love to know what the arguments are for the petitioner and the respondent, like the people who, you know, the Michael Nance's attorney, and then the state of Georgia, because he's basically.
I'm really interested in, like, how they're going to plead this case.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, how they're going to try to spend the Constitution in their favor.
And exactly. And, like, how, because, like, I'm genuinely interested in how, just because the Constitution is, in my personal opinion, I perceive it as a law-abiding citizen, right? It applies then and pretty much only then. So you being...
But the thing is, it's not just for law-abiding. It's for everybody.
Well, I know it's for everybody, but what I'm saying is, like, it's within certain parameters depending on like what the situation that you're in. If you're already in prison, right? And the preferred option is, for example, lethal injection. Just because you have a medical condition, that doesn't change anything. You're still a prisoner. You're still going to get lethal injection. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that doesn't make you exempt, because you know how many other people are in prison that have the same issues? And they don't even get the, death penalty. They're just sitting in jail, There's so many other people that don't get assistance and stuff like that in jail either. So what makes you better than the next person?
I don't know if it does make them better.
I don't think the Constitution is not gonna, it's like, it's one way. It's like, it is what it is. So,
but that's why they put those justices on there to interpret it and come up with brilliant arguments, basically, to like interpret it. Yeah,
I'm really interested to how this, because this case is, first of all, this is not like most cases that are on the docket. So
most of the cases on the docket are kind of, I feel like, halfway self-explanatory, actually. Like, when I was reading through, I was like, they were kind of like water lines, or like like big business type things. Exactly. But this one stuck out because it was so much about ethical questions that you don't always see them come up, especially when it comes to like death row and and the state acting as a murderer or becoming the unethical person in question. I think that that's why I chose this one, because I was reading through for the year, and like the vast majority were sort of uninteresting,
But, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, this one definitely stuck out. And it definitely provided for good conversation for us, for sure. So I'm sure the Supreme Court will be going 10 times more in depth than we are, even for our conversation. But actually, okay, before we wrap it up, and we gave our verdicts already, before we wrap it up, I do want to say, I don't know if you've been paying attention to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's like the new Senate, or not Senate, but the new nominee, Joe Biden's nominee for SCOTUS, for the Supreme Court. I don't know why. I normally don't pay attention to these things, but I'm so like deeply proud of this woman for going. I really am so proud of her, not only for how she handled the Senate confirmation hearings, but how like this woman's life and work has been to uphold the legal and justice system. And she's a Black woman, so the legal and justice system has just as frequently been used against someone like her, right? A Black woman. So I love that she is just like, she's totally like blown every other justice in their qualifications wise. She's blown them out of the water. She's held such like great composure. She's, presented herself, the facts, and she's been really above reproach. And I'm like so proud of her. And I normally don't get so proud of people, I guess, even if they are Black, because I'm like, oh, that's great, good for you. But I feel like she's so, she gives me like Obama vibes, in the sense that like she's so qualified and right for that position, and she's like stepping into her destiny, and I'm just here for it. Like, I wish I could hug her,
Seriously. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that. She is definitely like setting the pavement for future African Americans, especially in like law, and also too, like, you can accomplish pretty much anything you want to accomplish. You know what I mean? Like, when I tell you homegirl has done her work, her work, you know what I mean? And I'm talking tenfold compared to the other guys that are on the bench,
on the
board. So, and she's a Black woman, so claps to her, honey. Claps to her.
And
she reminds me of? She reminds me of Olivia Pope. Like, she's just like that strong Black woman. You're just like, yes.
Minus the scandal, because Olivia was doing way too much behind the scenes. But
before Olivia got there, she was doing her thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. She just, I just feel like, she's the perfect person to be up there, and like, if one person is going to represent us,
she's the most qualified.
Absolutely. And you know what? You hate to say this, because there's another Black person on the bench, Clarence Thomas, but I don't have that same feeling about him. And I think it's partly because he's a Black man, but because he also unfortunately represents he may as well be a white man as far as I'm concerned, really, actually. But like, I just feel like his presence has not represented progress and change and development the same way that Ketanji Brown Jackson will. You know what I'm saying? Because
For sure.
it's simply because of, his infamous issues with sexual misconduct in Anita Hill. Like, his presence even going into the Supreme Court justice position has always been questionable.
Drama.
Just because of questionable because of his outlook on women, right? And unfortunately, because I believe Anita Hill 110%, because I'm a woman and I know that all that crap that she said, true. Okay, so you can debate your mom on that, but just his outlook on. But for real, because the stuff she was saying back in the day, that stuff happens to women right now today.
Oh yeah,
and similar stuff like that has happened to both of us at jobs. So why do you think he wouldn't have done that? That's male culture.
Oh no, I definitely think, and that's acceptable. For them to do.
It is acceptable. So I 100% believe, believe her and subsequent women who've come forward, even with like Brett Kavanaugh, the women who've come forward about him. Like, I believe that what these women say, because that's what men do. Okay. You know what I mean? And that's another debate. But when I look at Clarence Thomas versus Ketanji, I see what has always been, unfortunately, the divide in our community is Black men not always being the beacon of support, of hope for Black people, always being interested in their own advancement, their own improvement, not necessarily being about the community. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's another thing I think about when I look at her, is because I feel like I could like be proud of her, it being on the bench, even if her decisions don't necessarily affect Black people, but she doesn't represent the same kind of like oppression to me that I think Clarence Thomas does.
Yeah.
So
agree. Well, let's shout out to her, because she's definitely killing
shout
it out there.
I think she has not yet, at the time of recording this, been confirmed, but it's looking like she's like well on her way, and I think they have like the votes and everything for her to be confirmed. So we're gonna claim that she's the first Black woman justice to be selected and picked for the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, that's really amazing. Like, she deserves that, and you really love to see it. So,
agree.
Anyway, so we're
gonna wrap up this episode. I don't know how we would get to this information, but we would love to know everyone else's opinion on this topic as well. Like, where do you stand? What would your final verdict be? And are you for, death penalty, execution, them choosing, them not choosing? Share that information with us. I would really love to know where people stand on that. But I do appreciate everyone tuning in for another episode of CaCo Talks in our new segment, CaseCold. I really hope everyone enjoyed it, and we will definitely have another one soon.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.